Long before the interstellar wars of the 24th century, a species of highly advanced humanoids roamed the galaxy, using their DNA to seed life on many worlds, some of which eventually evolved into intelligent, adaptable, resilient beings, with cultures and civilizations of their own, like humans, Klingons, Romulans, and Cardassians hailing from Cardassia Prime. As bipedal humanoids, the descendants of these progenitors shared many physical, emotional, and psychological traits, yet the diverse environments under which they evolved also allowed for many differences, with unique Cardassian characteristics, including gray skin, two thick vertical ridges on their necks, and an inverted tear or spoon-shaped ridge on their foreheads. They also preferred darker, hotter, more humid environments relative to the other species descended from the progenitors. An ancient people with a rich, vibrant history, Cardassians were once known as Habitians, possessing a spiritual culture famed for art and architecture, burying their dead in elaborate tombs filled with treasures like Jevonite, a rare, beautiful, and highly valued mineral found on their planet. While official contact with Bajor was not made until many years later, a Bajoran lightship designed for short-range spaceflight crash-landed on Cardassia Prime in the 16th century after encountering tachyon eddies that created a warp-style jump through space. Though the later Cardassian government denied these early flights took place, they eventually admitted the truth after Commander Benjamin Sisko of the Federation proved it was possible by building a Bajoran lightship and recreating the journey. Unfortunately for the Habitian civilization, by the 19th century, Cardassia Prime was largely a resource-poor planet, meaning that as their population grew, their prosperity waned, resulting in widespread famine and disease. Unable to save their population, the ruling elite were replaced with the Cardassian Union, a new, highly centralized authoritarian government, seeking a radical reformation of society to ensure their survival. Though many were involved in making this possible, none played a larger role than Tret Akleen, thereafter remembered as the father of the Cardassian Union. Dividing their administrative duties between three branches of government, the Civilian Detapa Council was meant to oversee the Military Central Command and Obsidian Order Espionage Agency. This government then created and promoted a new foundation for virtue and morality based on complete devotion to state and family. In exchange for accepting this new philosophy, the government would use any means necessary to ensure the population was fed and adequately supplied. Though this meant losing many important parts of their culture, the reforms worked and famines ended, earning the respect and admiration of the people, who then embraced these new values, which included adhering to rigid hierarchy, engaging in espionage, employing underhanded tactics to win by any means, and ruthlessly competing to obtain power. As a result, Cardassians became a highly suspicious, paranoid people, ever eager to take the advantage in any situation, as they feared others would seek to do the same. According to the Federation Captain Edward Jellicoe, Cardassians are like timber wolves, predators, bold in large numbers, cautious by themselves, and with an instinctive need to establish a dominant position in any social gathering. During a 22nd century experiment conducted by the Organians, an advanced alien species, Cardassians were infected with a deadly virus and initially showed compassion for the sick, but eventually killed the infected to save the larger group. As for their personal lives, Cardassians were greatly devoted to the family unit, taking pride in ensuring the safety, prosperity, and reputation of their household. Valuing education, Cardassian children went through intensive training from a young age, ensuring a highly educated and capable population, known for their photographic memories and ability to discuss nearly any subject, so well-disciplined they could resist Vulcan mind melds. Believing themselves superior to other species, they were also desensitized from a young age, taught that torture and other horrors were fine when directed towards enemies of the state. Greatly enjoying discourse of all forms, their mating rituals largely consisted of flirting through argumentation and debate, with intense discussion often considered a catalyst for romance. Though both males and females were free to work where they pleased, men mostly went into the military and government, while women entered the sciences and engineering. Once a highly spiritual people, admiration for the new non-theist government meant they became less superstitious over time, convinced that their own actions determined outcomes rather than gods or luck. Yet in reality, their blind devotion merely shifted from the gods of their old religion to the state, believing they must be willing to sacrifice everything for their infallible government. Using this philosophy as a guiding principle, their legal system consisted of a show trial in which all criminals were found guilty before the proceedings began. Therefore, the purpose of the televised trials were to give the prisoners an opportunity to confess, thereby reassuring the Cardassian population the government was always right and criminals were always caught. This all-encompassing devotion to the state even influenced their art and literature, producing famed works like The Never-Ending Sacrifice, an epic story spanning 7 generations within a family that showed selfless obedience to Cardassia, successfully stabilizing their home planet and nearby systems. For long stretches between the 19th and 24th centuries, the Cardassian Union greatly expanded their space through military conquest and colonization, sometimes settling their people on these new worlds, or else enslaving local populations to extract resources. Eventually, their efforts proved so successful that by the mid-24th century, the Cardassian Union was considered one of 4 great superpowers, dominating a large region of the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Yet similar to the Habitians, their successes meant increases in the population and a greater need for resources, leading to periods of destabilization where Cardassia Prime once again faced famine and starvation. Therefore, when ancient Habitian tombs were discovered in the 22nd century, many rich treasures and exquisite artworks were ransacked by locals, with even those relics saved and preserved in a museum, eventually sold by the government to feed the population. During the 23rd century, another period of destabilization caused the Cardassian government to be temporarily replaced by the First Republic, a time associated with the serialist poetry of authors like Aloja of Prim, who was later exiled to Vulcan. By the 24th century, the First Republic was gone, and the Cardassian Union returned, with the Detapa Council once again overseeing central command in the Obsidian Order. However, the reality of the situation meant the government acted as a police state or military dictatorship, with central command as the primary authority, while the Detapa Council were advisors, and the Obsidian Order operated on their own, leveraging secrets to assert their influence when they deemed necessary. With their government's power dependent on supplying resources to their people, they once again started expanding and conquering neighboring systems, leading to contact with the Bajorans in 2319, a highly spiritual people with a kind, generous nature, easily exploited by the invaders. Possessing technology a century more advanced than anything held by the Bajorans, the Cardassian Union officially annexed Bajor in 2328, enslaving the population to extract their resources. Yet the Bajorans were a fiercely independent people, not content to simply live as slaves, and so formed an extremist rebel movement that used guerrilla tactics and terrorism to fight back against their oppressors. Though elements within Central Command believed changes in strategy and greater commitment might still bring them victory, struggling for 40 years against undersupplied rebels on a technologically inferior world was an incredible humiliation for the Cardassian military, lessening their political prestige and legitimacy, which in turn strengthened the authority of the civilian Detapa Council. As most of the desired resources were already taken, Bajor no longer held the same value it once did. Therefore, the Detapa Council argued it was in the best interest of the Union to end the unnecessary expense in blood and treasure associated with the occupation. By 2369, the ruthless yet strategically minded rebel attacks finally paid off when Central Command relented to mounting pressure back home and agreed to withdraw their forces, granting victory and freedom to Bajor. Throughout the 24th century, the Cardassian Union grew convinced conflict with their Federation neighbors was inevitable, and so launched a preemptive strike against Setlik III in 2347, incorrectly believing the Federation was building up their military forces in the area. Yet Cardassian intelligence was wrong, and the resulting massacre of a civilian population left close to 100 casualties before the USS Rutledge responded with reinforcements to defend the planet. Among the Federation troops sent into this early battle, some, like Captain Benjamin Maxwell and Tactical Officer Miles O'Brien, earned awards and adulation for their heroism, but were nonetheless greatly scarred by the experience, holding prejudiced opinions about all Cardassians going forward, with the term spoonhead becoming a popular slur. Fighting the Federation Cardassian War for the next 2 decades, the United Federation of Planets entered the conflict with a sizable advantage in population and resources. However, their focus was on exploration and scientific research, meaning they needed to update their ships, technology, and crews to reflect their new military needs. The massive size of their holdings also meant their forces could never be entirely committed to a single cause, lest they leave their borders unsecured. Their size also meant they were surrounded by many enemies or rival states, sometimes resulting in multiple conflicts occurring at once. Oppositely, the Cardassian Union had a disadvantage in population and more limited resources, but dedicated a far larger percentage of them towards a military that was already highly experienced in combat and which had a smaller border to protect. This dynamic meant neither side could ever fully gain the advantage, fighting to a stalemate that resulted in the Armistice of 2367 before a formal treaty in 2370, creating a new demilitarized border. Going into the conflict, the Cardassian Union was at the height of their power, possessing a roughly comparable level of technology to the Federation and other superpowers, with their Galor-class ships doing well against Starfleet's Miranda and Excelsior classes in the first half of the 24th century. However, by the end of the war, the Federation surpassed them in many areas, like with their Galaxy and Nebula-class ships, as well as their superior sensor technology. While the war did much to bolster Cardassia's reputation as a major power, going head-on with the far larger Federation, and emerging with a respectable border treaty and territorial concessions from the enemy, the reality was that their overall strength lessened as they exhausted their fragile resource reserves, making it difficult to keep up with the technological innovations of their neighbors. Making matters worse, the end of one conflict led to the start of another, as the territorial concessions by the Federation meant some of their citizens were now living on worlds held by the Cardassian Union. Though some agreed to leave and were evacuated back to Federation space, others refused, hoping the Cardassians honored their pledge to leave the colonists alone. Yet they instead began a campaign of oppression to try and force the colonists to leave. As a result, some turned to rebellion and terrorism against the Cardassian Union, vowing to fight until their planets were granted independence. Using the harsh environment of the Badlands as cover for their ships, the Maquis rebellion used guerrilla tactics to become a persistent annoyance and embarrassment for their enemies. Though the Federation was officially on the side of the Cardassian Union, as this rebellion violated the treaty they signed, some individuals were so sympathetic they left the Federation to join the Maquis struggle. Among the most well-known defectors were Calvin Hudson, Ro Laren, Chakotay, and Michael Eddington. Relying on their military and intelligence to deal with the Maquis, the Cardassian government used political subterfuge to exact retribution against Bajor in 2370, secretly supporting the Alliance for Global Unity, or Circle, an extremist political faction promoting isolationism and xenophobia, rallying the divided populace against joining the Federation and behind the idea of Bajor for Bajorans. Hoping to one day reconquer Bajor, the Cardassian Union wanted the extremists in power because it meant they would break off relations with the Federation and lose their protection. Yet they ultimately failed and were abandoned by supporters when their connection to Cardassia was exposed. With yet another ploy against Bajor foiled, the Cardassian Union signed a treaty the following year, establishing formal peace and diplomatic relations between their governments. Suffering humiliating defeats against Bajor and unable to defeat the Maquis, Cardassia was far from the height of its power, unable to keep up with the Federation throughout the 2370s, as their neighbors not only had an advantage in population, resources, and technology, but were now far more experienced in battle and focused on their military needs. Though the Cardassian Union continued to excel in areas like espionage and military subterfuge, they greatly fell behind the other superpowers and were even failing to conquer new planets for resource extraction, causing many to feel the military central command could no longer be trusted to rule, leading to a rise in support for the civilian dissident movement, which gradually gained support throughout the years. It was in the midst of these civil tensions that the Alpha and Beta quadrants were invaded by the Dominion, a Gamma quadrant superpower traveling through a wormhole discovered near Bajor in 2369. Ruled by a highly advanced species of changeling shapeshifters, the Dominion was a vast empire where the changeling founders were worshipped as gods by their genetically engineered creations, namely the intelligent Vorta species, who administered their holdings, and the mighty Jem'Hadar, who fought their wars. Originally creating the Dominion as a means to protect themselves from outside threats, the founders considered Bajor, the Federation, and all others trespassing into the Gamma Quadrant as an immediate and imminent threat, and so destroyed all their colonies in or near their territory, while pushing back and cutting off any further travel through the wormhole. Though the Dominion remained in the Gamma Quadrant at this time, a large-scale war with the Alpha and Beta Quadrants seemed inevitable, which then led a faction of Romulans and Cardassians to launch a preemptive strike against the Founder homeworld in 2371. Organized by Enabran Tain, head of the Obsidian Order espionage agency, who allied with their counterparts in the Tal Shiar of the Romulan Star Empire, their mission ultimately failed because they were infiltrated by a changeling agent who purposely encouraged their efforts so the Dominion might plan a trap, resulting in a crushing victory for Gamma Quadrant forces in the Battle of the Omarian Nebula. Back on Cardassia, this devastating defeat led to the fall of the Obsidian Order, allowing for Military Central Command to take full control of the government. Yet after years of gaining influence, the dissident movement finally struck and overthrew military leadership to establish a civilian government under the Detapa Council. Seeking to inflict further damage upon the Alpha and Beta Quadrants before their invasion, the Dominion infiltrated the Klingon Empire and manipulated them into attacking the Cardassian Union, based on the pretense that their recent civil upheaval was a Dominion plot to take control of their government. Unprepared for a large-scale war, the Cardassians lost a number of systems but were able to rally their defenses thanks to a warning from the former spy Elam Garrick to prevent the conquest of their capital. Condemning this unprovoked invasion, the Federation angered Chancellor Gowron, who ended their decades-long alliance, leading to the brief but destructive Klingon-Cardassian and Federation-Klingon Wars of 2372 to 2373, weakening these three superpowers significantly. Eventually, it was discovered that a changeling infiltrator replaced Gowron's chief advisor, General Martok, and the wars ended, but the Empire refused to give up the systems conquered, leaving tensions high between Alpha and Beta Quadrant powers. In 2373, the Dominion took the next step in preparing for their invasion by negotiating a secret deal with the infamous Cardassian military leader Gul Dukat, who formerly served Central Command before betraying them to side with the civilian rebels. Seeing an opportunity to seize power while restoring the strength and glory of their people, Dukat agreed to ally with the Dominion in exchange for their support of his government. Therefore, when the Dominion fleet finally came through the wormhole, it was not as an invasion force, but rather as friends, sending troops to reinforce their Cardassian allies, giving them time to set the stage for a larger invasion. Reinvigorated by this new alliance, Cardassia was a superpower once more, able to crush the Maquis rebels in the Badlands, and reconquer all their former holdings from the Klingons, who were so shaken they retreated into their space and re-signed the Khitomer Accords, restoring their alliance with the Federation. Realizing they could not allow the invaders to grow any stronger, it was ultimately the Federation that provoked the start of the Dominion War by placing mines at the mouth of the wormhole, preventing further reinforcements from the Gamma Quadrant. Unwilling to allow this, the Dominion readied their forces and launched an attack against the Federation station, Deep Space Nine, to prevent the completion of the minefield and gain control over the wormhole, with Gul Dukat placed in charge of their war effort, while the more politically minded Vorta Weyun advised and oversaw their efforts for the Founders and Dominion. Though Dukat won the second battle of Deep Space Nine, they were unable to prevent the mines from activating and the station computer was sabotaged, delaying their work in finding a way to deactivate those mines. The Dominion Alliance then learned that while they were attacking DS9, a combined Starfleet Klingon task force crossed into Cardassian territory and destroyed the shipyards at Toros 3, dealing a significant strategic loss to the Gamma Quadrant invaders. Even without their reinforcements, the Dominion Alliance was a formidable enemy that pressed the attack, eventually bringing the Federation Alliance to the brink of defeat. Suffering loss after loss, Captain Benjamin Sisko soon learned Dukat was ready to disarm the mines, restoring their access to the wormhole, which meant certain defeat for the Federation. Therefore, Sisko convinced his superiors to invest massive resources into Operation Return, with the goal of retaking DS9 to regain control over the wormhole. Though greatly outnumbered and unable to prevent the disarming of their mines, Federation and Klingon forces created an opening in the enemy line, large enough for Ben Sisko aboard the Defiant to pass through and enter the wormhole, where he contacted a group of powerful, non-corporeal aliens with mysterious powers that had a special bond with the planet Bajor and individual Ben Sisko. Worshipped as prophets by the Bajorans, they agreed to interfere this one time, causing Dominion reinforcements to vanish while traveling through the wormhole. Relying on those ships to complete their victory, Dukat and the Dominion did not understand why, but quickly realized no reinforcements were coming, and so fled the station, retreating back to Cardassian space. All except Dukat, who suffered a nervous breakdown after witnessing his second-in-command Damar shoot and kill his daughter Zael when she sided with the Federation and refused to leave the station. With Dukat gone, Damar was made leader of the Cardassian Union, but their most recent failure meant a significant loss in prestige for all Cardassians, meaning Damar was not granted the same kind of authority as his predecessor, serving instead as a mere puppet for the Dominion. Turning to new allies for victory, the Cardassian Union was forced to accept territorial concessions to the Breen Confederacy in exchange for their entry into the war. No longer the proud superpower they were when the conflict began, the Dominion even started sacrificing large numbers of Cardassian troops for the sake of minor victories, viewing their people as expendable. Damar, once a proud Cardassian and loyal soldier, grew depressed from all he saw and drank to numb the pain. But after reconnecting with his old friend Dukat, he got the encouragement needed to stop drinking and truly become a leader for his people, taking them towards a greater future. Betraying his Dominion colleagues, Damar formed a rebel movement which started attacking the enemy from within Cardassian space, and even reached out to the Federation, which sent personnel and supplies to help their cause. Unfortunately for the rebels, a traitor revealed their location and their forces were massacred, but Damar refused to give up and went out into the streets, leading a citizens' revolt on Cardassia Prime. As Damar fought in the capital, the Federation, Klingon, and now Romulan alliance launched a final attack against Dominion forces, which were defending well until news broke that the government destroyed an entire city on Cardassia Prime, killing millions as a response to Damar's rebellion. Learning of the devastation, Cardassian forces turned against the Dominion in the midst of battle, granting victory to the Federation alliance, who chased them back to the capital. To retaliate against the Cardassians, the Founder ordered the citizenry of their homeworld wiped out, resulting in many more dead before Elam Garak, Kira Nerys, and more of Damar's rebels could enter Dominion headquarters to kill Weyoun and capture the enemy leader, eventually resulting in her surrender. Though Damar died in the fighting, he was remembered as a great hero who gave his life for the liberation of Cardassia. Reaffirming their independence and pre-war borders in the Treaty of Bajor, Cardassia's attempt to become the greatest superpower in the region ended in utter ruin, as their planets, including the capital, were on the front lines of combat, enduring such collateral destruction that by the end of the 24th century, the Cardassian Union was a shell of its former self, relegated to a minor power, forced to rebuild from the ashes of their fallen civilization. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Sir Darin of House Ashford, Ishmam Ahmed of Shamiriana, Fred Heartless, Knight of Iron and Ice, and Pete J. King. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.